The rain tapped a restless rhythm against the rusted awning. Harlem tonight wasn't as crowded as usual, but a few dark-coated figures still drifted by. Under the sickly glow of a street lamp, a man sat against a brick wall, his eyes closed, fingers moving over the worn neck of an old guitar. His voice gravelly, deep, and aching seemed to slow the whole street down. Suddenly, a tiny hand reached out, dropping a single copper penny into the open guitar case. It wasn't the usual crumpled dollar bill or loose change from passers-by, but a coin old enough to shine strangely in the lamplight. Tucked under it was a folded piece of paper, damp on one corner. The man's brow furrowed as he felt the coin. "Mister, don't stop singing," the little girl whispered. They're looking for you." Before he could ask, she was going to run him down the block. At the corner, a sleek black car sat idling, two people in long coats watching him from inside. On the door, in faded lettering, were the words, Juilliard School. Miles Carter had learned long ago that Harlem had its own rhythm, one that didn't care who you were, what you'd lost, or how you'd gotten here. It pulsed in the rumble of the subway under 125th Street, in the holler of vendors selling hot dogs and incense, in the laughter of kids skipping rope on cracked sidewalks. For Miles, it existed most clearly in the spaces between those sounds, the moments when his guitar chords floated above it all, refusing to be swallowed by the city's noise. That night, like so many others, he sat cross-legged on a flattened piece of cardboard near the mouth of the Lenox Avenue subway station. The November air bit through his worn denim jacket, but his fingers were steady on the guitar strings. He didn't need to see the street around him to know it was alive. He could smell the fried chicken from Sylvia's drifting down the block. Hear the sharp click of high heels passing too close. Feel the bass vibration from a car stereo rattling by. Miles had been blind for 15 years, more than enough time to stop missing the light and start reading the world in textures, echoes, and warmth. The accident had stolen his sight when he was 17, a moment he still remembered not in images but in sensations. The smell of burnt rubber, the violent spin, the crunch of glass. And then a silence so deep it felt like the world had turned away from him. Before that night, music had been everything. He'd grown up in New Orleans, the youngest of 3 boys, and the only one who could coax the family's old upright piano into something more than noise. His high school music teacher had pushed him toward competitions, recitals, and eventually an audition for the Juilliard School. He had been 2 months from leaving Louisiana for New York when the crash happened. Afterward, Juilliard sent a letter. He never opened it. His mother cried herself to sleep for weeks. His father worked double shifts and said little. A year later, she was gone. By then, the piano sat silent in the living room, its keys gathering dust. With no scholarship, no parents, and a body still learning to move without sight, Miles drifted. First to Baton Rouge, then Memphis, and finally, New York City. Harlem was where he stopped moving, not because it was safe, but because the noise and chaos somehow felt like home. The guitar had come from a pawn shop on 145th Street, traded for 3 days' worth of busking money and a coat he didn't need in the spring. He'd taught himself to play by ear, mapping each fret in his mind the same way he mapped the streets he walked. People passed him every night, dropping coins into his open case or ignoring him completely. He didn't take it personally. In a city like New York, people had their own storms to outrun, but sometimes someone would stop not just to throw change, but to listen. Those were the moments that kept him coming back. It was on a cold Tuesday evening, just before Thanksgiving 2 years ago, when he first noticed the girl. Her footsteps were light, hesitant. She didn't toss a coin into his case. Instead, she lingered, the sound of her breathing mixing with the low hum of his final chord. "That song?" she said softly. Her voice was young, maybe 10 or 11, but carried a strange certainty. Miles tilted his head toward her. "Which one?" "The last one. My mom used to play it on our piano. I've never heard it anywhere else." Something in his chest tightened. She must have written it then. The girl shook her head, and he could hear the quick swish of her scarf brushing against her jacket. "No, she said she heard it once when she was about my age. played by a boy she never forgot. Miles set his guitar down slowly, feeling the weight of her words. That song was his. He had written it at 16 in the back of his geometry notebook, and played it exactly once outside his bedroom at a Juilliard pre-audition in New Orleans. No one else had ever known it. The girl didn't tell him her name that night, and he didn't ask. She stayed for another song, then said she had to get home before it got dark. He could hear her footsteps retreat, light and quick, vanishing into the city noise. After she left, Miles sat there long after his fingers had gone, numb, replaying the conversation in his head. 15 years since that song had left his hands. And here it was again, carried back to him by a stranger's child. The following week she came again. This time she stood closer, just within the warm radius of his voice. She asked about his guitar, about how he learned to play without sight. Her curiosity was pure, without pity. She told him she lived a few blocks away, above a laundromat, and that her mother always asked why she came home late on Tuesdays and Thursdays. I told her I was listening to the man on the corner, she admitted. And Miles could hear her grin. Those evenings became their quiet ritual. She would stand there, groceries in hand, listening to whatever he felt like playing, sometimes blues, sometimes folk, sometimes that same unnamed song. And every time he played it, she would hum along as if it belonged to her. Still, he never asked her name. Part of him was afraid too. People in Harlem came and went, better not to get attached. But deep down, he knew she was different. Just another listener. She was a link to a life he thought had vanished. One night, just before she left, she said, "My mom wants to meet you." Miles didn't know why the idea made him nervous, but it did. "What for?" She says she owes you a thank you for the song. He wanted to ask how her mother could owe him anything. Before he could, she was gone. Footsteps fading into the clatter of the subway grates. That was the last Tuesday, before everything began to change. The wind coming up Lenox Avenue that night was sharper than usual, cutting through the street like a knife. Miles had been playing for almost an hour, the crowd thinner than normal, mostly people rushing home, heads down against the cold. His fingertips were numb, but he kept strumming, each chord warming him a little from the inside out. Then he heard them. 2 sets of footsteps, one light and quick, the girl's, and another slower, heavier, deliberate. He didn't need eyes to know they were walking straight toward him. "Miles," the girl said, using his name for the first time. "This is my mom." The other voice stepped into the space between them. It was lower than her daughter's, tinged with a gentle southern lilt, the kind that carried warmth even in the cold. "Mr. Carter?" He nodded slowly, his fingers brushing the guitar strings into silence. "That's me. I'm Ana Morales. I don't know if you remember me," but she broke off, as though weighing whether to go on. 15 years ago I heard you play, just once. At a high school recital in New Orleans, Miles felt his breath catch. "I played a lot back then. Not like that," Anna said. Her voice shifted, softening into something almost reverent. "It was at a hall near the conservatory. You played a piece you said didn't have a name. A melody that starts low and blooms upward, like sunlight after rain. He didn't move, didn't speak." That description, those words, were exactly how he'd once explained the piece to himself. "I never forgot it," she continued. It changed the way I thought about music. I was a Juilliard student then, visiting home. I dropped out the next year, but that night, it stayed with me." The girl Lena shifted closer to her mother. "I told you, Mom. He's..." The one Anna gave a small laugh that was half a sigh. "When she came home talking about a man on the corner playing my song, I thought it was impossible. But here you are." Miles let the guitar rest against his knee. "Tell me now, after all this time, because..." Anna hesitated, and when she spoke again, her voice had a weight to it. "I want you to have this." There was a rustle of fabric, then something small and cool touched his palm. He curled his fingers around it instinctively. "Metal, smooth edges. It's a penny," he said. "Not just any penny," Anna replied. "Look closer, Will. Feel closer." He ran his thumb along the edge and stopped. "They're faint, but unmistakable. Were tiny grooves." I picked it up outside that recital hall the night I heard you play, Anna said quietly. I kept it all these years. It was a reminder that something beautiful can appear out of nowhere and stay with you forever. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Miles kept tracing the letters as though trying to memorize them through. Touch. He couldn't remember dropping it, but it felt like something he might have done fidgeting in a jacket pocket before walking on stage. That's yours, Anna said. I think it's been waiting to come back to you. He wanted to ask her why. Why now, after a decade and a half? But something in her tone told him this wasn't just about nostalgia. They stayed a while longer, talking in fragments between songs. Anna didn't offer details about her life in those missing years, and Miles didn't press. Lena sat on the curb, chin on her knees, humming along every time he picked up the guitar again before leaving. Anna rested her hand lightly on his shoulder. Keep playing, Mr. Carter. Someone's going to hear you again. Someone who can do something about it. And then they were gone, their footsteps merging into the Harlem night. Miles stayed at the corner long after, the penny in his pocket feeling heavier than it should. For the next few weeks, Anna and Alina came often, sometimes together, sometimes Alina alone. Conversations stayed light, but the music grew deeper. Miles found himself playing the unnamed song more often, as if it were a bridge between the three of them. One night, Alina asked, "Do you ever think about going back? To school, I mean?" Like Juilliard. Miles laughed, short and sharp. 8 was another life. Mom says you're better now than you were then. She's kind to say so. But I'm not the same musician I used to be. No, Alina said softly. You're better. It was the week before Christmas when things began to change. The nights were colder, the streets quieter. On one such night, Anna didn't come. Alina arrived alone, her small hands buried deep in the pockets of an oversized coat. She's sick, Alina said when he asked. The doctor says she needs rest. I told her I'd still come here, you. Miles nodded, strumming a gentle tune. The wind carried it down the street where it faded into the traffic hum. When the girl left that night, she said something that stuck with him. If anything happens to Mom, I'll make sure you keep the penny. 3 weeks later, Anna was gone. The news hit Miles like a chord struck too hard to suddenly. Lena came to him on a Tuesday evening, her voice breaking as she pressed the penny into his hand again. She told me to give it back to you and to tell you it's time to go back. Back where? He asked, though he already knew. To the place you were supposed to be. Snow fell in slow spirals that night, drifting down through the pale glow of the Harlem street lamps. Miles sat in his usual spot at the corner of 125th Street and Lenox, his guitar case open at his feet. The air smelled faintly of roasted chestnuts from a vendor down the block. Most people hurried past without pausing, their boots crunching against the thin layer of slush gathering on the sidewalks. He wasn't expecting a crowd tonight, nights like this. Music felt less like a performance and more like a conversation. With himself, Miles ran his fingers lightly over the guitar strings, letting them hum in soft, low notes. He played the unnamed song, the one Anna had remembered, the one Alina still hummed when she thought he wasn't listening. The melody rose and fell like breath, like something alive. Across the street, he couldn't see the man who had set up a tripod and camera in the snow, but he could feel it, some faint shift in the air when someone isn't just passing by, but watching. The man stayed still for the entire song. When Miles finished, he heard the faint click of the camera shutting off, then footsteps fading away without a word. Miles shrugged it off. Harlem was full of strange moments that came and went. 2 days later, things began to change. It started with the sound of someone calling his name, not Hey, guitar man, not street musician, but his real name, Miles Carter. A woman's voice shouted from across the street. He turned toward the voice, I'm sure if he'd heard correctly. You're on the internet, she called, hurrying over. My nephew showed me a video of you last night. It's everywhere. Instagram, TikTok, that song, it's beautiful. Miles frowned. A video? She pulled out her phone, the tinny sound of his own guitar spilling from the tiny speaker. Even in low quality, the song carried its warmth, its ache. Listened. For a moment before shaking his head, "That was 2 nights ago. 2 nights ago, and already millions of people have seen it," she said. "People are asking who you are. Some say you're a Juilliard dropout. Others think you're some undiscovered genius." Miles gave a wry smile. Let them guess. But guesses wouldn't be enough for long. By the end of the week, people started showing up at his corner on purpose. Not the usual passers-by, but strangers who stood in the cold with their phones out, waiting for him to play the song from the video. Some tried to talk to him, asking where he learned to play, why he was on the street. Others asked about the penny, apparently. Someone had zoomed in on the viral footage and spotted it lying in the guitar case. "Is it true?" one man asked him. "Is that penny from Juilliard?" Miles just laughed. Pennies are from everywhere. By the second week, reporters started coming. The first one was from a local Harlem newspaper, then a journalist from an online music blog, then a crew from NY1. They wanted a story story that would explain the mystery. The attention made Miles uneasy. Fame, even the smallest taste of it, felt dangerous. He had built his Harlem life carefully, small, quiet, under the radar. Now the city was leaning in, staring too closely. Alina was the only one who seemed unfazed. She'd sit next to him while he played, legs swinging over the curb, grinning when people clapped after each song. "They like you," she said one night. "They like a video," Miles replied. "Same thing, if it makes them listen." One Friday evening, as the winter wind sharpened, a man approached wearing a long wool coat and carrying a leather portfolio. He waited until the small crowd had thinned, then stepped closer. "Mr. Carter?" Miles tilted his head. The man's voice was precise, careful, like someone used to speaking in front of rooms full of people. "I'm Jonathan Avery," he said, "Director of Alumni Relations at the Juilliard School." The name landed like a chord struck too hard. Miles's fingers tightened on the guitar neck. "I'm not an alumnus." "No," Avery said, "but you were accepted. Class of 2008, full scholarship. You never came." Miles swallowed. Life happened. Avery nodded slowly. "We've been following the online response to your performance. That piece you plates in our archives labeled as an original composition from your audition. We'd like to talk to you about possibilities." "I'm not interested in pity invitations," Miles said, his tone sharper than he intended. "This isn't pity," Avery replied. "It's recognition. It's in an open door." When Avery left, Miles felt the cold settle deeper into his bones. He thought of Anna's words, "Someone's going to hear you again, someone who can do something about it." Alina noticed the shift in his face. "Who was that?" "Just someone from a place I used to dream about, Juilliard," she guessed. He didn't answer, but he didn't have to. That night, after packing up, Miles walked the long way home. The penny was in his coat pocket, warm from being held there all day. He kept turning it over in his hand, tracing the grooves of his initials, back at his tiny rented room above a deli. He sat on the edge of the bed, guitar leaning against the wall. Snow tapped softly against the window. In the quiet, he could almost hear Anna's voice again. "It's time to go back." The black sedan idled at the corner of 125th Street, its engine a low, steady hum beneath the winter air. Miles could feel it before he heard the door open, something in the way the small crowd that had gathered earlier suddenly went quiet, as if the city itself was holding its breath. The driver stepped out first. A tall man in a dark coat, scanning the street like he'd been told to look for trouble. Then the rear door opened, and a pair of boots touched the slush-covered sidewalk. "Miles Carter," a woman's voice called, steady but edged with something warmer. He froze. The sound of her tone, it was like hearing a chord he hadn't played in years but still knew exactly where it belonged. "I'm Grace Holloway," she said as she stepped closer. "I was on your Juilliard audition panel in 2008. Miles adjusted his grip on the guitar. "That was a long time ago." Grace's breath came out in a mist. "And yet here you are, still playing the piece you brought us that day." He didn't answer. The crowd was beginning to thin, but Alina was still there, sitting cross-legged on the curb, her chin propped in her hands. Eyes darting between the two of them, Grace moved within arm's reach, but not too close like she knew not to crowd him. "I remember you walking into that room," she said. 17 years old. Nervous, but the moment you sat at the piano, you changed the air in that hall. Miles chuckled dryly. "Guess I should have held on to that air." "I don't think you lost it," Grace replied. "Think you've been keeping it alive here." Her gaze flicked to the guitar. The instruments changed, but the voice is the same. Miles shifted his weight. "Why are you here, Miss Holloway?" "To tell you something I should have told you then, that Juilliard didn't just want you. We needed you, and we still do." The words landed heavily. He wanted to believe they were just flattery, a recruitment tactic. But Grace's tone wasn't. Slick, it was. "Tired, honest. I'm not the same kid you heard play," he said. "No," she said. And for a moment, he thought she might agree with his doubts. But she continued, "You're better. We've built programs now, mentorships. Adaptive training, accessibility for artists who've lost their sight. You could teach as well as learn. Inspire students who think they've lost their way." "I'm not a teacher," he said quickly. Grace smiled faintly. "You already are. Look at her." Miles didn't need eyes to know she was pointing at Alina. The girl gave a shy grin. Alina jumped in before Miles could speak. "She's right. You taught me that music can make you see things even if your eyes don't work." Kid Miles started, but Grace cut in. "You think you're protecting yourself by staying here on this corner, but really you're hiding." That stung. "You think you know me?" "I know enough," Grace said quietly. "I know you. Left New Orleans with a scholarship in your pocket and a future that terrified you because it was finally something you wanted. And I know you lost more than just your sight in that accident. You lost the belief that the world would wait for you to catch up." Miles didn't respond. The guitar case at his feet felt suddenly too open, too exposed. Grace reached into her coat and pulled out a sealed envelope. "This is a formal offer from Juilliard. Full tuition, housing, and a place in our adaptive performance program. All you have to do is say yes. You didn't take it. And if I say no, leave you to your corner," she said simply. "But I won't stop thinking about the fact that the best musician I ever heard play might never step inside a hall again." She set the envelope on the edge of the guitar case and stepped back. The driver opened the car door for her, but before she got in, Grace turned to Alina. "Make sure he at least reads it." Alina nodded solemnly, as if she'd just been entrusted with a sacred mission. The car pulled away. Leaving the street suddenly too quiet, Miles stood there for a long time. Eventually, Alina came up beside him, picking up the envelope and pressing it into his hand. "You could at least open it," she said. He turned it over in his fingers, the weight of the paper somehow heavier than it should be. Opening it means thinking about it. Thinking about it means maybe you're ready, Alina finished for him. Miles almost laughed. The kid had a way of cutting through him without even trying. That night, back in his tiny rented room, Miles set the envelope on the table next to the penny. They sat there together under the dim light, the past and the future in two small objects. Didn't open it? Not yet. But the thought wouldn't leave him the image of a stage, a warm spotlight, and the sound of that song carrying farther than Harlem's streets. The knock came on a Tuesday morning, sharp and deliberate. Miles wasn't expecting anyone. He had been sitting at a small kitchen table, cradling a mug of coffee that had gone cold, staring at the unopened Juilliard envelope lying next to the penny. He set the mug down, stood, and crossed the short distance to the door. "Miles Carter?" A familiar voice asked when he opened it. It was Jonathan Avery, the Juilliard administrator he'd met on the street weeks ago. But this time, he wasn't alone. Standing beside him was a man in his late 50s, wearing a camel-colored overcoat and a navy scarf. His posture was straight, his handshake firm when Miles offered his hand. "This is David Morales," Avery said. "Anna Morales' brother." Miles's breath caught at the name. David nodded once, his voice low and deliberate. "I understand you knew my sister." "I played for her and her daughter a few times," Miles said carefully. David's gaze softened. "She spoke about you. Even near the end, she'd mentioned this man on a Harlem street corner who played a song she'd been carrying with her since she was a girl. They sat down inside, David declining coffee but resting his gloves on the table. Avery remained standing, giving David the space to speak. "My sister was complicated," David began. "She made choices some of us didn't understand. Leaving. Juilliard was one of them, but I think maybe she stayed connected to music through people like you." Miles ran his fingers along the edge of the penny, which sat in front of him on the table. David's voice lowered. "Anna left something in her will for you." Miles looked up sharply. "For me?" David slid an envelope across the table. Wasn't like Grace Holloway's no heavy official seal. No embossed paper, just plain white, his name written in. Ink that had smudged in one corner, Miles opened it slowly, feeling the texture of the paper as he unfolded the single sheet inside. The handwriting was Anna's, careful but faint. "Miles, if you're reading this, I'm gone. I don't have much to leave, but I want you to know that the music you played gave me something to hold on to. If you still have a place in you that wants more than a street corner, take this gift and use it to get there, for yourself." For Alina, underneath was a cashier's check. Miles didn't have to see the numbers to know it was substantial enough. For living expenses, travel, whatever he needed to get back on his feet. He set the letter down, unable to speak. David leaned forward. "She wanted you to have a choice, Miles. She told me once that she thought the worst kind of loss was when someone stopped believing they could step forward. She saw that in you and she hated it." Miles gave a quiet, humorless laugh. "Wasn't subtle, no," David said, "but she was right." Avery finally spoke up. "Between this and what Juilliard's offering, there's nothing in your way except you." Alina arrived that afternoon, breathless from the cold, her cheeks flushed. She spotted David immediately and ran to hug him. "What are you doing here?" she asked. David smiled, smoothing her hair, trying to give your friend a push in the right direction. When Alina noticed the open letter on the table, she picked it up gently. "You read it?" she said to Miles. "Yeah," he replied softly, and she pressed, "and it's a lot to take in." Alina set the letter down and crossed her arms. "Mom wouldn't have written that if she didn't mean it. She wanted you to do this, Miles." David stood, gathering his gloves. "I'll leave you two to talk. Just remember, this isn't charity. It's a bridge. You either cross it, or you stay where you are." After he left, Alina sat at the table, swinging her legs. "You know, if you don't go, I'm going to tell everyone that the famous Harlem street musician is afraid of school." Miles laughed, the sound catching in his throat. "You're not afraid to use blackmail, huh?" "Only for good causes." That night, Miles found himself holding the penny in one hand and Anna's letter in the other. He thought about the last time he'd stood on a real stage, the weight of the piano keys under his fingers, the stillness in the hall before the first note. The streets had given him freedom, but they had also kept him small. Maybe Anna was right. Maybe the world wouldn't wait forever. The next morning, Miles called Grace Holloway. "If I were to say yes, what happens?" Grace's voice lit up. "You'd start with an evaluation, then orientation. We'll set up housing, accessibility tools, and a schedule that works for you. You'll have people who want you to succeed." "I'm not promising anything," Miles said. "Understood," Grace replied, "but I'll send the paperwork anyway, just in case." The stone steps leading up to the Juilliard School felt taller than they looked. Miles stood at the base, his fingers curling around the railing, sensing the weight of the building before him. The air carried a quiet hum, not of traffic or street chatter, but of music leaking faintly from somewhere deep inside. Beside him, Alina was practically bouncing on her toes. "Are you ready?" she asked, gripping the penny tightly in her mittened hand. "I'm here, aren't I?" Miles said with a half-smile. "That's not the same as ready." He exhaled, feeling the cold air settle in his chest. "Maybe ready isn't something you feel. Maybe it's just something you decide." Alina grinned, then decide faster. "It's freezing." Inside, the warmth hit him instantly, along with the scent of polished wood and sheet music. The marble floor under his boots carried a faint vibration, the kind you feel when a piano somewhere nearby is being played. A guide, one of Juilliard's accessibility coordinators, greeted them and led them through the hallways. Miles's cane tapped lightly as he walked, counting steps in his head. He could hear the shift of acoustics as they moved from one corridor to another, narrow, then opening into what must have been a large lobby, then narrowing again. Voices echoed differently here, softer, more focused. "This is Paul Hall," the guide said as they stopped. "It's where your first performance will be." The door opened and the air changed. Miles could feel the space before he even stepped. Inside, wide, high-ceilinged, with the faint scent of velvet curtains and the subtle creak of wooden seats, he walked slowly toward the center, his boots brushing the stage's polished surface. The silence was different, here not empty, but expectant, like the whole room was holding its breath. He set his guitar case down and knelt to open it. His fingers found the smooth neck of the instrument, the familiar worn frets. Beside the guitar, in the small pocket where he kept extra strings, he placed the penny Alina handed him. "You're going to play it?" she asked. Miles nodded. For her, when the first note rang out, it didn't sound like it did on the street. The hall caught. It held it and sent it back to him richer, fuller, as if the sound itself had been waiting for this room. He let the melody unfold, the same one he'd played for Anna, for Alina, for strangers on Harlem sidewalks. Each chord was a memory. The weight of Anna's hand on his shoulder, Elena's humming on cold evenings, the quiet of his tiny rented room with the unopened envelope beside the penny. By the time he reached the bridge, he could almost hear Anna's voice again. It's time to go back. When the last note faded, there was a pause, just a breath, before the small audience in the hall began to clap. It wasn't a full crowd, just faculty, a few students, and Grace Holloway standing near the back. But the sound filled the room in a way that wrapped around him. Grace approached as the clapping died down. "Welcome home, Mr. Carter," she said. Miles managed a small smile. "It still feels like I'm visiting." "You'll get used to it," Grace replied. Then, leaning in, she added, "The stage missed you." Later, as they sat in the empty hall, Alina ran her fingers over the penny. "You know," she said, "Mom would have been sitting in the front row if she was here." "I know," Miles replied, "and I think she was." Alina handed the penny back to him. "Keep it with you, even when you're not playing that song. It's like a reminder." Miles closed his hand around it. "A reminder that someone believed in me before." "I did." Over the following weeks, Miles's world shifted. His schedule filled with classes, practice sessions, and meetings with other musicians. At first, he felt out of place, too old to be a student, too different in how he navigated the world. But then came the moments when a younger pianist would ask him about phrasing, or a violinist would say his sense of timing taught them something new. He started to realize that Grace had been right. He wasn't just here to learn. He was here to give. On a Thursday evening in early spring, Juilliard hosted a small public showcase. The program listed Miles last, under the title Original Composition, Untitled. Before stepping on stage, he slipped the penny into his jacket pocket, the metal warm from being held all day. He took a deep breath and let the quiet of the hall settle over him. "This piece," he said into the microphone, "is for a friend who heard it once and carried it with her for the rest of her life, and for her daughter who made sure it found its way back to me." He began to play. This time the song felt different, not because of the hall, or the guitar, or the audience, but because he finally understood it. The melody that once belonged to a boy with a dream, and later to a man hiding from it, now belonged to everyone in the room. When the last note faded, the applause rose like a wave. Somewhere in the sound, Miles thought he could hear a single voice saying, "Now you're home." The spring sunlight spilled across the Juilliard courtyard, warming the stone steps where families, students, and faculty gathered in a swirl of excitement. The graduation ceremony had just ended, and the air buzzed with congratulations, laughter, and the rustle of gowns. Miles stood off to the side of the main crowd, guitar case at his feet. Wasn't wearing a cap or gown. He wasn't graduating, but he had been invited to close the ceremony with a performance. Grace Holloway had insisted. Tradition needs new voices, she'd told him, from his place backstage earlier. He had listened to the list of names being called, the applause, the occasional cheer that cut through the formality. But his thoughts kept drifting to the girl. In the front row, Lena now, a little taller, her hair tied back, holding on to the same penny she had given him in Harlem months ago. When the dean finished his speech, Grace took the microphone. Before we end today's celebration, we have a special performance from someone who reminds us that the path to this stage is not always straight, but it is always worth taking. The crowd quieted as Miles walked forward, guitar in hand. His boots touched the boards of the temporary stage. He took a moment before speaking. "This song," he began, "was written when I was 17. Back then, I thought it would be the piece that opened the rest of my life. It didn't, at least not the way I expected. Life took me somewhere else, somewhere far from stages like this." He paused, turning slightly toward the front row where Alina sat beside her uncle. "But a few months ago, a little girl brought me a penny and a message from her mother. Someone who had heard this song once and carried it for the rest of her life. That gift brought me here today. This is for her daughter, and for anyone who thinks their moment has passed." He began to play. The melody rose easily now. No hesitation in the fingers that once doubted they belonged here. The sunlight caught the strings, each note carrying into the open air. He didn't think about the crowd, the professors, or the prestige of the school behind him. Thought about Aina hearing it for the first time, Alina humming along on a cold Harlem night, and the penny resting like an anchor in his pocket. When the final chord faded, the applause was immediate and overwhelming. Miles smiled, not the guarded half-smiles he used to give on the street, but a full one that reached somewhere deeper. Afterward, Alina bounded up the steps onto the stage. "You did it," she said, wrapping her arms around him. He chuckled, hugging her back. "We did it." She pulled away just enough to hold up the penny. "I think it's yours again." He shook his head. "No, I think it's yours now. To remind you that sometimes the long way around is the best way." Her eyes widened. "You mean I can keep it?" "If you ever need it," he said, "you'll know what to do with it." As they stepped down from the stage, Grace joined them, smiling at the sight of Alina tucking the penny safely into her pocket. "She's going to do something with that," Grace murmured. Miles nodded. "I know." They paused at the edge of the courtyard, where the city's noise started to filter back in. Somewhere beyond these walls was Harlem, the corner where all this had begun. The thought made him smile, not out of nostalgia, but out of gratitude, because now he realized that corner wasn't where his story ended. It was where it had been waiting for him to start again.